Hi, everyone. I'm going to introduce my co-panelists here. First, we have Kim Spada, who is the Litigation Consulting Manager at Harris Central Appraisal District, with over 18 years of experience in property tax administration, exemptions, operations, and litigation support. She has held progressive leadership roles within HCAD, overseeing staff, managing compliance with the Texas Property Tax Code, coordinating hearings and mediations, and supporting district operations and reporting. She holds an Associate of Applied Science degree as a registered professional appraiser and certified tax administrator, and has received multiple professional awards from the Gulf Coast chapter of TAAO. Brenda Lim is an appraiser within the Total Exemptions Department at HCAD, where she's worked for over 20 years, 19 of which were in exemptions. So she has an extensive expertise on the tax code, particularly homestead and total exemptions. Brenda conducts formal and informal exemption hearings, processes exemption applications from start to finish, and assists HCAD's legal department and outside counsel with pending litigation and mediations. She has her RPA, CTA, is registered with the TDLR, and has a Texas real estate sales license. So please welcome Brenda and Kim. Thank you. Now, these two, we met last month to discuss kind of brainstorming what we're going to talk about today, and they are very passionate about what they do, and so we're really lucky to have them today to kind of share their experience and maybe share some case studies. Now, the topic of this is about the trends that the district is seeing in these applications for religious exemptions, whether it's just like a church or a place of worship or a residence for those religious leaders. We call those a clerical residence. Now, personally, I'm a religious person. I'm familiar with, residences for priests. These properties are tax exempt because, a lot of these religious leaders, we just don't want them to worry about, there's the public purpose of not needing to worry about a tax bill, especially when certain religions take an oath of poverty. So I'm sure we've all seen in the news other stories about just the things that we're seeing with multi-million-dollar properties being tax exempt, or helicopters being tax exempt for under the religious purpose exception. So that's a little backstory, just to talk about why we got here. Is this working? I had a property tax case that was transferred over to me from our legal department at HCAD, and it involved two surgeons that had a couple houses off Braeswood Bayou that they transferred to a 501c3 nonprofit, and they were trying to get a religious exemption. I think we'll hear, I had to work with Brenda a lot on that case because it was interesting. I guess my first question to you all is just, in your experience working on these religious exemption applications, are you seeing, as Jovina called it, repeat customers, or people coming every year saying, okay, can we try this? I think the big theme of this discussion will be this line between religious use and maybe abuse of the property tax system. So yes, do you see the same protests every year?
Yes, we do get several of them every year. It's kind of the same thing, little trend. They're just trying every which way, just fishing around, seeing what they can do to be able to get the exemptions.
I think the biggest thing is just educating them in this type of exemption, because we see a lot of, religious organizations, they don't pay taxes. That's their thing. Also, there's application processes. There's a lot of different things that they have to go through and qualify with. So it's just, the biggest thing is education, and just teaching them that you have to apply, you have to qualify. These are the things. You don't just get to become a clergy member and your house is automatically exempt. There's a lot of ownership issues. There's a lot of things that take place when it comes to these exemptions. And we do that obviously because like Jason had mentioned, when there's exemptions, that burden has to be shifted somewhere else. So we try to make sure that those exemptions are applied appropriately.
Awesome. Let's dive more into how the application process starts. So can you tell us a little bit about how these applications get filed and when they end up coming to you in a hearing or whatnot?
Yeah, so they do, it isn't an automatic exemption, which a lot of them do assume that it is because their state churches don't pay taxes. But it is not. Under the tax code, it is required for them to apply for an exemption, usually for a timely period by April 30th. But there is also late file provisions that they can go back 5 years prior to apply for their exemption. They do not need to apply annually. But then they also need to tell us exactly what the use of the properties are there for, if it is for religious or if it's going to be for clergy residents.
Okay, great. And then as far as supporting documentation, what kind of things does the district need to see from these property owners to really evaluate these applications?
One of the first things is that it must be owned by the organization. So a lot of times they provide quitclaim deeds or warranty deeds. They became into a little bit of a trend that they were not recording the deeds. So when the properties were being sold, a lot of those properties being sold never showed that the grantors were actually the organizations themselves. We have, even though it's not required by the state of Texas to record a warranty deed, we recommend that they record those deeds when they're transferring those properties to the organizations. And also they must provide their governing documents, their articles of incorporation, their bylaws, how the organization is created, or the missions and purposes for which they're created and that they can do. And of course, their dissolution statement. Dissolution statement is letting us know what happens if the organization is to dissolve. It's not that it can go and be reverted back to the founders of the church. A lot of times they feel, well, I'm the founder, I'm the owner, I'm the president. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that for religious. It has to have a qualifying dissolution of where the assets go. It could go either to the state, the county, another local jurisdiction, or to another qualifying nonprofit created as a 501c3, but it just cannot revert back to the individuals. So those are the main documents to start with, and then we'll actually verify what the property is being used for.
Yeah, and oftentimes that dissolution statement is found in the Articles of Incorporation. That's at least what I've seen so far. And I can just read, it has to say something along the lines of, upon dissolution, the assets will be transferred to the state of Texas, the United States, or a charitable, educational, religious, or similar organization that is qualified under 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. So it's very specific. Now, I know y'all have, let's talk about this. Talk about kind of what the properties need to have in order to qualify, what kind of characteristics are needed.
Well, for churches, there's nothing specific other than they must be holding a religious worship. There's nothing, no guidelines as to what is considered to be a religious worship. It is belief. The issues, we don't have them that much on the use of the properties for religious worship. It's more on the use for the clergy part that becomes more of an issue on our side. Due to the fact that one of the main requirements is that their principal occupation is that they're to serve the clergy. But a lot of times we're seeing that is not their principal occupation. That's probably a side job or something they do on the weekends. And they've converted these homes, like he said, neurosurgeon transferring her residential properties to clergies, and yes, they were neurosurgeons. Just stuff like that. It's just, it does say principal occupation, so we do try to find as much information as to what is your principal occupation to qualify for a clergy, especially when sometimes they have clergy residence, but they do not have an actual place of worship. They will claim that they're holding services in the residence.
And how do they prove their principal occupation? Like, is there specific documents you ask for, or is it just that, there is no way to prove it?
Well, a lot of times, I don't know, I'm a little nosy. If you're gonna send me an email, please make sure you're not sending me your email from your job. from ABC oil companies, CFO, yeah, that clergy may not be your principal occupation. Or showing up to the office and you have some corporations shirt on or something like that. It makes us question exactly, but we have been known to ask them to sign an affidavit stating, do they have other employment outside of the clergy? And a lot of them are actually very honest and will tell us that yes, they have other employment. So the possibility is, what is your primary occupation may not be clergy. And especially when a lot of times they do not own a place of worship or show that they're even leasing a place where they're holding services.
I know in my case, there is some funny affidavits like, testifying that they're a clergy person because they're the financial person for the clergy, and as part of their duties, they pray over the donations, and that's their whole occupation. So, I've just seen really interesting stuff with this. Let's see, what is our next slide? Can you talk about examples of things that do qualify for the religious exemption?
So like we've mentioned, place of regular religious worship, that primarily is majority of the applications, but you can also have a clergy residence, and you can have more than one. As we know, there are larger churches that actually have multiple locations, so they'll have multiple clergy members, and they'll have multiple homes for those clergy members. So you could have more than one, but those are also qualified types of property. Your tangible business personal property. So as was mentioned earlier, they are required to render that, and we are required to implement that or set that account up for them. So their business personal property assets also qualify for this exemption. And then we have a lot of raw land out there that are wanting to expand on their or have another location, but also just if you don't have a location, as Brenda said, sometimes they have a residence prior to obtaining a place of religious worship. So we do have exemptions under expansion and under construction that are limited to a specific time frame, and those also will qualify under construction or expansion.
And I think we have a slide that talks more about that. I thought this was really interesting, and I hope one of you can talk more in depth about this, and also the tidbit about just being careful about when you activate that construction exemption, because sometimes it can take more than 3 years.
Yes, so a lot of times, again, that's education and coming in. They'll purchase a property, and a lot of times they will go ahead and start that process of wanting to get that exemption in place, but they're still trying to raise funds to be able to construct that building. So there are times that we kind of let them know, hey, this construction exemption, it's only allowed for 3 years. So we really try to not, tell them what to do, but just give them advice on, you really ought to think about those 3 years. If it's going to take you 6 years to build this, or it's going to take you longer than that 3 years, you may want to determine, okay, when do I want to start this exemption? Because if it's not complete after that 3 years, we have to remove the exemption.
Now I just want to go into like some of the case studies that we had discussed. There's some really interesting properties out there that you kind of see application of all these rules that we've just talked about. So tell us about the Second Baptist, the Strip Center, how it has a total exemption and how that's a possibility under the tax code to have a partial exemption.
So this is the slight difference, well, I shouldn't say slight difference, but this is one of the differences between a religious exemption and a charitable exemption. Religious, it just has to be primarily used and not exclusively used. So church properties, sometimes if they lease out a portion of their property, they can still get the exemption on the percentage that they're actually occupying for religious worship or for a qualifying religious purpose.
And is that by square foot, or how is it measured out?
Typically, based on, yes, the square footage that they lease. In this case, this is kind of a shopping strip or retail. It's not your standard one building religious property. So this was an existing building that they purchased under, this is close to, if you're familiar with their Woodway campus, this is right next to their Woodway campus, and this was purchased again as a secondary property after their Woodway campus. And so when they purchased it, they already had leases. So some of their, most of this was occupied by leased space. So they were receiving an exemption on just the small portion that they were using. Over time, as those leases have come up, they've expanded the property to include their. So each year, they will turn in rent rolls with the square footage, and as that increases, the percent will increase to eventually their goal in this particular property, of course, is to occupy it at 100%. But yes, that's typically how that is done.
Okay, so we mentioned that they generally don't have to reapply for the exemption, but in this case, it sounds like they have to be submitting those yearly financial statements or rent rolls. Is it sort of like the district just wants to keep an eye on the use of the property, or why is it that they have to submit stuff every year?
So they are required to submit every year. They're not required application. The only time that they will submit a new application for properties like this is if they start to occupy more for religious use. So each time that they occupy more of the space and they'd like a larger portion of the exemption, they'll need to turn that information into us.
Okay, let's turn to some more fun examples. This is a property, I believe this is the New Light property, is that right? Okay, so I'm just gonna lay out a few facts about this property just because it was recently, in the past couple years, listed for sale. This is a 24-acre property in Spring, which 24 acres, that's about a little smaller than Dakin Park, or what used to be Minute Maid Park in downtown. It was listed for $15 million in July 2024. There's a lake that has trophy bass. There's an estate with 5 junior estates, a resort-style pool with cabanas, 22 garage spaces, 2 garage apartments, over 40,000 square foot of living space, includes 15 bedrooms, 31 full bathrooms, 5 kitchens, fitness center, and a sunken jacuzzi tub. So this was a tax-exempt 6-home estate, kind of like a compound, and it was operating as the Minister of New Light's Retreat and Conference Center. This news article had said that in 2023, it was appraised at $8 million. So that would have been $151,000 in property taxes that would have been given to the county. Now it's for sale for $11 million, or I guess when it was in sale in 2024. Can you just talk about this property and just kind of what the process was like on the district side, and also mention their helicopters, please, because it's so interesting.
Okay, well, this property was interesting because, yes, that main mansion on the property, that is his clergy residence. Under clergy residence, under section 1120, for clergy, the maximum acreage allowed is 1 acre. When this came up, we really had to, since they told us it was his clergy residence, we did have to go out there, do site inspections, get a little bit more clarification as to really what is this property being used for. It actually is for ministry retreat. He held conferences there. That was a place for traveling ministers to come and stay. So that was a reason, as Jordan mentioned, it is 24 acres. It was not just considered a clergy residence. It is actually a place where they also hold worship and have conferences for the ministry. So it would still qualify, even though it is clergy, but since it is mixed for the religious use as well, it did qualify. Every now and then they do come ask us, why is this clergy residence exempt? It is actually not just a clergy residence, it is a retreat. But yeah, he does use that property.
And as Jordan mentioned before, the helicopters and jets. So this is one of those churches that has multiple locations. And as we know, in Houston and surrounding Houston, it's not always easy. It's a 30-minute commute can mean a 5 to 10 mile drive up the street, right? So in order for him to be able to get to his multiple locations, he's going to need more than just a vehicle to do that, to be on time. So it was reasonably necessary for him to have a helicopter, and that helicopter was used for the religious purpose. So therefore, that helicopter is also exempt under that business personal property we were talking about.
Yeah, really interesting case study. Real quickly, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about this was Kingdom of God. This was a tax-exempt property that was previously a hotel. This property was then raided by the FBI in August 2025 for alleged $50 million forced labor and money laundering scheme. So obviously, as a religious person, I know that there are, valid needs for these tax-exempt properties, but this is an example of that line between, religious use versus abuse. This is the Ismaili Center, which is actually by our office. Can you all just talk about how the construction exemption was played out on this property, and also just kind of like how this brings some great economic stuff to the Houston market?
Well, they've owned this property for many, many, many years, and it was vacant, prime vacant land right there behind Olsen and Olsen. And they really weren't ready to construct. So what they were using it for, their stated use was for a soccer fields, which then became more of a under charitable is what they came under for charitable for youth activities. That went on for a while. Then afterwards, they even stopped using it for that purpose. It did end up changing. That then they became when we started questioning the use of the property is still vacant. There's no use. They came back and said no, we are using it. So they still stuck with that it was going to be charitable because they were not ready for the construction phase for the center because they were having these grand, big plans for it, so they were not ready for it. And they knew that it was going to be 3 years for that property. But so what they decided to do is they started displaying artwork around this property on the fence line and holding tours. So we did leave the exemption on there under the charitable. Up until recently, they did come back and they started their construction and they finished it within their time frame, and they changed now to religious. So it is under religious section 1120. It is a beautiful large center, which whenever that grand opening, that probably brought in a lot of funding, even though they don't pay taxes on this prime property, but everything they bring to the community for the city of Houston, for the hotels, everything, it actually does generate money back into the community. Even though we don't see it, we may not see it tax-wise, but what it generates back to bring in people from all over the world for this center, it will generate the funds required. So, but it is a beautiful place.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of just trying different sections of the tax code, whether it's artistic or cultural or religious. And it is a center that will bring a lot of economic good to the city. Can you all talk about Lakewood Church and more specifically the Olsteins and how kind of the things that the Olsteins have done to kind of lobby for changes to the tax code?
Yeah, so just interesting enough, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Lakewood and Joel Osteen. So originally, he actually is one of those churches that doesn't have a clergy residence, so he owns his property and pays his taxes on his home. But when it came down to Lakewood, used to be, I don't even remember what it's called. Thank you, the Summit. I'm a millennial, so it was before my time. But it used to be the Summit. It was owned still by the Sports Authority when Lakewood took it over. So they were operating out of there on a lease. And then they eventually were able to, which you may have heard him speak on this because he speaks on this a lot, but they were able to actually purchase the building. So once they purchased the building, they then had to make an application because, like we said before, ownership is a requirement to qualify for the exemption. So they had to apply. And there used to be a comptroller rule that you had to submit your salaries when you submitted your application. That was a required supporting document. And so when they came in around that same time, he actually entered into a book deal and announced to the congregation that he would no longer be taking a salary. And so being the conflict of that, he went ahead. We, of course, requested salaries, and they came in and they were able to give us those salaries in a private meeting, and we're able to go ahead and submit those. However, that rule was changed shortly after that, so they no longer had that requirement in that rule, and so they were able to get that legislatively changed.
Yeah, really interesting. In our last 5 minutes, I would just love to talk about y'all's experience working on exemptions, kind of being that you are not, licensed attorneys, but still relying every day on the language of the tax code. Just, tell us about how your departments work on applications and seeing the eligibility or validity of these applications while you can't ask these people, like, hey, is your religion actually valid?
Well, of course, like we've put the definition up here previously, but religious is a religion. I can't be biased to that. And it's open. There's not, it's just a place of worship. You can worship whatever you'd like. The requirements are the requirements as long as you have your governing documents, as long as you've set up your organization accordingly. That aspect of it is something that we don't typically look at, the type of religious organization or what type of religion. We can't really get into that. But it's, as far as being an attorney or feeling like an attorney, we definitely rely heavily on our attorneys for the case law and for the studies on that and being consistent with our decisions. That's really what we try to strive for, is just being consistent in the decisions that we make. We want to be fair. We want to be uniform with everyone. Whatever type of religion you have in determining whether or not you have an exemption.
And then just lastly, I want to touch on just the impact that exemptions, either religious or just broadly exemptions, have on local budgets. I know we had talked about just the need for a legislature to step in and how much the school districts are suffering with revenue and how cities and county budgets are under, and the shifting tax burden. If you could just touch on that in our last 2 minutes.
Well, we are taking these properties off the tax rolls. A lot of times the argument is always, well, we're doing good for the community. But also there's no consideration as to, some of them, we don't see them even do anything for the community, but they do say that they are. They forget that taxes is what pays for the schools, the roads, the ambulance whenever somebody's needing it, and fire departments and everything else. Those are covered by the taxes. And I think sometimes legislation needs a little bit more clarification on, especially the clergy, what should be considered clergy, the acreage, the dollar amount. It's just so many that are coming up that they're all in the millions of dollars in value on some of these houses, and we just prefer a little more clarification as who should qualify for clergy. The principal occupation, that it should be clergy, it's a little broad, but that's why we try to use, do you have another occupation? But then even that is starting to get challenged even on the end of the churches as to who are we to decide what is principal occupation when they pray every day, 24 hours a day. But, just a little more clarification would be nice.
Yeah, it sounds like every application that the district receives, no application is the same. And the more you look into the tax code, the more gray areas that you will find. I really appreciate the two of you speaking about your experience. We're really lucky to have them today. So thank you all so much.
So good.